Hey, it's Diana and Susanna, your favorite global health scientists.
And this is episode 2 of our season 2 series on global caveat.
Today, we're tackling the complicated topic of gun violence prevention. It's an emotional topic for many people. We're going to do our best to break it down and shed light on the highly misunderstood issue in the United States of America.
But before we get started, we want to thank all our supporters who make Global Caveat possible. We appreciate shares, money, subscriptions, and reviews. You can become a contagion, this cute name we have for our patrons, by signing up as a patron for as little as $1 a month.
And this season, we will have new content for patrons. We will be hosting 2 AMAs every month, one with us, your favorite scientists, and one with different guests we've had on the show. If you have any burning questions, requests, or things you'd like to ask with the privacy of anonymity, this is for you. There is no such thing as a stupid question.
This is a stupid question. What's an AMA?
Oh my gosh, it's an Ask Me Anything, so you can literally ask anything you want. Except, you should maybe not ask us about how to do coding and statistics because we over here are being like, Stata, why you be like this? But anyway.
Anyway, we know that gun violence is a sensitive topic, and we want to note that we will not be discussing any specific events in detail. Mm-hmm. We will reference different events that have occurred, but this conversation focuses on how we can understand the issue of gun violence and what we can do to advocate for the safety of our communities.
Now, let's dive in. On today's episode, we'll be talking with Michael B. Bagg, a third-year medical student and advocate on gun violence prevention at McGovern Medical School at UT Health, Houston.
Hi, Michael. Can you introduce yourself for the rest of our listeners and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Michael Bagg. I am originally from El Paso, Texas. I went to El Paso High, Go Tigers. Went to and eventually go to the University of Denver, where Susanna and I were actually took a couple classes together. I graduated with a degree in international studies. And at some point between my sophomore and junior year, I had a big change of heart and decided to go to medical school, and that's how I ended up. That's how I ended up in Houston at McGovern Medical School in my third year now, planning on going to pediatrics. My reason I went to med school is kind of rooted in advocacy, but while I've been in med school, I've developed a specific interest in gun violence. I've worked with a couple classmates on some, and we started with a class basically, which was we started after the Las Vegas shooting. We realized that nobody was really talking about it, so we created this platform that we could educate future healthcare providers about an issue that they're going to be seeing in the clinic. And so it's always been rooted in education, and it's, approaching it from a very nonpartisan, like, hey, this is just what you're going to be seeing on a daily basis. Maybe not necessarily a daily basis, it really depends on what specialty you go into, but the point being is that you're going to see it. So you should know what it looks like, you should know what goes into this issue, why it's so political, and how you can approach it from an educational standpoint. And so that class is continuing on. I've passed it off to second years now, so it's their thirds now. We're going to see where it goes without the original participants involved. But I was involved last year. I've written 2 op-eds, one after the Santa Fe shooting, one after the El Paso shooting, just as trying to take as professional of approaches that I can with these issues. One thing that we found is that you can, obviously you're talking about guns in Texas, and we do have a reputation for a reason, but we can successfully talk about how to address gun violence in Texas, if we take a professional and nonpartisan approach.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that covers pretty much. So it's kind of not very concise, but giving a bit of a background about how I ended up with a bit of a gun violence background.
Sure. I think for the sake of my understanding and maybe even Diana's and for a lot of people listening, let's start with kind of the basics. So I think when we talk about gun violence in the United States, at this point, we immediately think mass shootings.
Right.
Which is undoubtedly a very huge problem.
Yeah.
But in my very limited understanding of gun violence, there are also many other issues related to gun violence that aren't just about mass shootings, right?
When you talk about gun violence, it's easy to try and lump it all together, right? Mm-hmm. Because everyone just sees there's something like 30,000 people who die every year and countless more are injured. Mass shootings account for a very small percentage of that, and they understandably take up a large amount of the immediate attention. But I would encourage your listeners to think of gun violence more as like, a suicide issue, a homicide issue, an accidental injury issue, and then a mass shooting issue, because they all have a common denominator, which is they all involve a firearm. But they're all very different in how they look and the factors that lead up to those events. And that means that the solutions to those events, the things that can make those better, are all look very different. So something like, the thing that I focus on the most is safe storage. Safe storage and research. So a lot of the times you hear people talking about guns. Well, we're operating. Their solutions are not always rooted in evidence. And that's in large part because of the last 20-something years, there's been a moratorium basically put on public health research addressing gun violence. And so there's just so much that we don't understand. And so we want to try and set the conversation, focusing it mainly on suicide. Like I said, go back to suicide, homicide, accidental injury, and mass shootings.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the moratorium that you just mentioned. Right. That's a pretty big word. So can you break down like what that means, what the impact of that is?
Okay, so the Dickey Amendment was some language inserted. I forget the exact year, but basically the CDC, 1996, there you go. Thank you, Google. But basically, the CDC was looking at gun violence as taking a look at it from a public health perspective. That was Dr. Rosenberg at the time that had in charge of it. And then a congressman named Jay Dickey. They were really butting heads, and the specific language was put into a law basically saying that it's not specifically prohibiting gun violence research, but how they phrased it was enough to scare people from saying, look, this is my career. Why would I want to study something that is going to be so inherently political that I could lose my job at any moment? I mean, it basically scared off public health researchers from addressing this issue. So for the last 20-something years, you've had such a lack of focus on this issue. And so whenever you see this come into the media spotlight, we're kind of in the dark. And that's not to say we shouldn't do something about gun violence, but, we need to pair that with a commitment towards funding gun violence research so that we can understand the impacts of the potential solutions that we implement.
Yeah. So I don't know if you have the stats in front of you, but just to give us a picture just of how important this issue is.
Sure. So I mentioned pediatrics. I want to be a pediatrician someday, and so I'm obviously I put most of my focus on the aspect of harming kids. Okay. And it's one of the leading causes of death in children. I mean, accidental injury and suicide are huge factors for children. Big picture, 30,000 plus Americans die every year from gun violence. It's a big problem. And again, drop in the bucket is just because mass shootings are not a significant portion of that number does not mean they are not a significant problem that we should address.
Right.
But the big number are suicides. So it's like 19,000 suicides a year.
And that's by firearms specifically?
Successfully committed by firearms. So the firearms are not the most common method of attempting to commit suicide, but they are the most common method of successfully completing suicide. So you've got, I don't have this in front of me, but if I remember correctly, it's like a 90% success rate with a firearm compared to the next leading cause. The next most successful is jumping, which I think is at 20 or 30%, and followed that by pills. So, when you look at a success rate, people being able to kill themselves, if they have access to a firearm, they're going to be far more likely to do that. They're going to be far more likely to be successful. And one thing that we do know is that if you can get somebody past a suicide, they're not likely to die from suicide. So if you follow somebody who's unsuccessfully attempted to commit suicide, you keep following them over time, they're unlikely to have died from a subsequent suicide attempt. So if you're capable of stopping that attempt or preventing that attempt or preventing them from accessing the most lethal means of attempting suicide, then you're going to save a life. And so to me, that's the low-hanging fruit here. There is no easy solution to gun violence. That's just, it's something that, I know a lot of time, talk about from like a global perspective, you look at how other countries have done that. We're in unprecedented territory here. We have more guns in this country than anywhere else in the world. I think we account for like 40% of all privately armed firearms just in our country alone. I think there are like 120 guns for every 100 Americans. So there's more guns than Americans here. The next most common country, report from a couple of years ago, the next country with the most firearms is Yemen, and they're like less than half that per 100 people. They're in the middle of a civil war, if I remember correctly. I mean, it's just like their situations are not comparable. But we have like 390 million firearms is estimated in the U.S. I mean, those are there. They are already out there in the U.S. Like even if you start imposing restrictions on sales, books, they're out there, they exist. And so we need to look at solutions that can help make firearms coexist safely in our society, rather than, look back on what we could have done to address in the past. Because when you're looking at, how your relationship with guns, whatever your relationship with guns, having a firearm in the home is a risk factor. You're increasing your risk for homicide, you're increasing your risk for suicide. So, when we talk about firearms in the clinical setting, it's like, hey, this is a risk. Just like a pool is a risk for drowning, firearm is a risk for homicide or suicide. And so here's what we can do to decrease that risk. That way people can make an educated decision for themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, if I have a child in the home and I have a firearm in the home, okay, well, I should keep it locked and unloaded and kept separate from the ammunition. And that's a big factor. That when you talk about children as well, the estimates are like 4.6 million children in the U.S. live in a home where the gun is kept unlocked and loaded. That's just an accident waiting to happen. You ask a kid, you talk to their parents, like, well, I've kept it hidden. They can't find it. They don't know where it is. And you can turn to that kid and be like, where does Dad keep his gun? And they will tell you. They're curious. They go exploring. They find it. And so when you talk, you look at these accidental discharge injuries, these kids are playing around. They didn't know what they were doing. You read about a 4-year-old who accidentally shot himself. That happens because they're just left out. And I would encourage your listeners to just Google a date and firearm gun injury, and you'll probably find something. You'll probably find one for almost every day of the year.
Do you know how much the risk increases in a home for harm or death if they have a firearm versus if they don't have a firearm?
I'm hesitant to share the number that I have in my head just because I know it's an old study. I think it was back in the 1990s, the one that I most recently looked up. Okay. I can tell you that it is a risk factor, and it's a significant risk factor, but I don't have the exact number in front of me that I want to put out into the world.
Yeah. That's,
sure. So you were saying, like, if you are able to have those kinds of conversations or have those questions where you ask if they have a firearm, but if it's coming like after someone comes in from an accidental discharge or something.
Oh, no, it's not.
Right? Or are you asking anytime?
Well, child checks. When you or in really any primary care setting.
Okay.
Again, I focus more on kids just because that's what I want to do. But this is family medicine, internal medicine. Anytime you're having a conversation about preventative health, obviously, you should probably have that conversation in the ER too when you got a kid who's bleeding because they shot himself in the foot on accident. That's a conversation that should be had there too. I'm a firm believer that we can start changing the conversation, and whether or not legislators act, that we can start changing behaviors in our community. Like, what's the expectation? So if we can make our community safer by just how we approach things, if we can encourage responsible gun ownership, because to me, have a firearm, that's fine. I just care that you keep it safe, that you create a safe environment. If you can afford a firearm, that means you can afford a gun safe too. Or at the very least, a gun lock. That's kind of hard. You can't really demonstrate in a podcast, but I'd encourage people to Google them because they're very different, but they're different ways of securing your firearm to make sure that people who aren't supposed to be using it don't use it. One of my favorite things that I've seen most recently is actually out of the CU Med School and their MPH program. They found all the places that you could temporarily store your firearm in Colorado. Say you're in the middle of a depressive episode and having a gun at the home is really not safe for you. You know where you can go temporarily store your firearm until you are in a place to get it back. Because if you're actively suicidal and you have access to a firearm, well, what do you think is going to happen?
Right.
Yeah.
And so those are the things that that's not necessarily something that a legislator had to propose. We didn't have to have a law saying that exists. It's just something that somebody in the community said, hey, we deserve to know this. And they went out, they researched it, they found all the locations, and they made their community safer by doing that. Now, obviously, let's put pressure on our legislators. You want to. My soapbox right now has been research, funding for research, because if we can't commit fund resources to that, then we're never going to understand this, and we're going to continue having these conversations where we're yelling at each other based off of little evidence, and nobody's going to go anywhere.
Yeah, I just think that's so cool that they have that. I don't know that. I'm curious to if everywhere has them, but it's just secret and it's not known.
From what I understand, that's the first of its kind. It came out a week ago. I was nerding out when I saw it. I was like, this is amazing, because it comes back to. I think the focus is always on what's happening in your state capital or what's happening in DC.
Yeah.
But there's so much that you can do to change the culture in your own community to make it safer. And so if we're changing the culture where the expectation is, well, wait, you have a gun, why isn't it locked up? That's not right. If we can get people asking those questions and holding each other accountable, then that's going to create a safer community. The other thing too is like, well, if your kids are going over to a friend's house, are you asking that parent like, hey, like, do you have guns at home? Because a lot of parents like, well, I don't have guns in my house, so why do I need to have this conversation with my kids? And the reality is like, what if they go to a friend's house and the parent keeps the gun unlocked? I've definitely had conversations with individuals who've had their kids go over to a friend's house and there was a gun out and they didn't know what to do. Mm-hmm. They've never, it's obviously any child with access to a firearm is a risk, that's a risk waiting to happen, even if they have had the appropriate training. Mm-hmm. But those kids who've never been exposed to it, I mean, you can imagine that's a bad situation.
Yeah. So I think your approach is really interesting because I think when people hear about gun violence, they think it's a very black and white issue where people have very clear positions about it. And they're like, people think it's either, oh, you're all about banning all guns, or you're all about like, oh no, it's like our American right to have it, blah, blah, blah. And there's that argument. And I took this like advocacy course and our group actually did it on gun violence. And, we were told to research like pro-gun people's perspectives. And I think it's really hard being a medical professional or being a public health professional because you see how much harm it can do. And then you're trying to advocate in a way that's, like you said, bipartisan.
Bipartisan appeal.
Yeah.
But my focus is always on the patients.
Right.
I could care less who's in office. I could care less who I'm working with, and I'm not there for a party. I'm not there for red or blue. I'm there to make sure that my patients will not have to come through the door to the ER and go into trauma surgery. That's what I care about. And as long as you're coming from that perspective, when you're talking about from a public health perspective, it's the same perspective. You're trying to prevent people from, who cares who's in office? Can they help you save lives? Right? And when it comes down to gun violence, I mean, if there was an easy solution, this would have been a conversation that ended in the 1950s. Like this is a complicated issue for a reason. I mean, what works in other countries is not necessarily going to work for us. We have a very unusual situation here where there's this, one, a sheer quantity of firearms that are already out there. And two, I mean, it's literally baked into our Constitution. And I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I'm not trying to interpret the Second Amendment, but you cannot ignore the fact that there is something that is inherently, we're proud of our gun culture in the U.S. And I'm not trying to take away. My focus is not on taking away guns. My focus is not on gun control. It's not on pro-gun. It's about preventing firearm injury. That's what I care about. And frankly, if you're looking at preserving the Second Amendment, I would be inherently concerned about preventing the most dangerous thing to that, in my opinion, as an individual, is this continuing epidemic of gun violence. Because if this keeps happening over and over again, well, what's going to happen to that?
Yeah. I think that's a really good way to delineate your, approach. I don't know what the right word for it is, but I think that's pretty much the conclusion that I've come to with a lot of different issues that are very political in nature. But like you take a step back and you're like, okay, but like regardless of politics, regardless of like who's in office, let's look at the people, right? And I think that's a really great way to just kind of step back and be like, okay, like what's really the problem here and how can I approach it? And I think you summarize that perfectly.
Right, and again, like anybody's trying to tell you that there's like, oh, all you have to do is do this, and this problem's gonna be fixed. They're just lying to you. I'm sorry. That is a false answer, and there's no perfect. So like my biggest thing outside of the research is the safe storage push, and that's not gonna get you all the way. Even if we had 100% of Americans storing their guns safely, you're still going to have accidents. They're still going to happen. You're still going to have suicides. But it will make a positive difference. It's going to make that situation better. Mm-hmm. But I'm not trying to convince people that it's going to make it completely better. I'm not going to try and convince people that everything is going to be completely 100% safe.
Yeah.
It's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
But obviously more work needs to be done. I think, safe storage is the most heavily supported by evidence. There are other things that are starting to receive more and more support with evidence. I feel most comfortable talking about safe storage, especially because it's something that I can directly impact in the clinical setting. In my little local bubble, I can talk about safe storage, and I know that there's a chance that family might go home and buy a gun safe. Mm-hmm. And that makes that...
Wasn't there a study in was it Massachusetts where they had pretty high level of protection laws put in place regarding safe storage and they found that to reduce risk?
I don't know I've gone off a lot of the RAND Rand has put together a huge compilation of available gun violence research. I don't know of a specific study in Massachusetts, but I do know that safe storage is heavily supported. And I would encourage any of your listeners who owns a firearm to make sure they own a gun safe.
Yeah.
Now, when you say gun safe,
Sure.
because I don't know anything about guns, like that can mean anything from putting in a box and then putting it in my closet to like putting it in a safe with like a pin code and like all
I take issue with the closet. It has to have a lock, a way that people cannot open it. I would attribute hiding it putting in the closet as to hiding it where you think other people can't get to, which especially if you have small children, they will get to. But I mean, I would honestly go talk to your local gun store about that. There are so many different ways there are a lot of different types of firearm safes. You know, you could stick one in your drawer, a bedside drawer. You can stick one in your closet. You can have one in your garage. They can be massive. They can be tiny. Quick access. One. I mean, there are just all sorts of things that you can do, and I'm not the expert on that. That would be your local gun store.
I feel like when people acquire or purchase guns or firearms, they should be required to also get a safe or like the proper storage thing. Or, I mean, if they already own one, then like somehow show proof that they own one.
I mean, if you can afford a firearm, you can afford a safe. You know, it's not like these things are cheap.
It would seem like something like, I mean, of course, I have no idea what the conversation entails of like walking into a store and like talking to a specialist or someone there, and like I don't know if they're telling you like, hey, you should probably buy this or not. I have no idea. I don't know the intricacies of each conversation. Again, like there's a lot that's expected currently of firearms store, like the gun store owners, to like screen people and like educate people. And so maybe you get really lucky and you get someone who's a really great, hey, here's what you need to do to be a responsible gun owner. That's not really standardized right now. And I think nobody has an issue with responsible gun owners. I mean, those guys, those are the ones who are, take a look at the Santa Fe shooting. I mean, the Santa Fe mass shooting, the kid accessed his father's firearms. And so, again, I wouldn't say safe storage is going to stop mass shootings on a large scale. But that's a situation. If you can limit a child's access to guns, then you can save lives in a very big way. Speaking of like all the things where it's like, obviously like, politics are here or there, it doesn't really matter. Like what it comes down to is like stepping back and trying to figure out what is the most effective. Discussing things where like creating some form of like uniformity amongst gun store owners or something, but also like this kind of goes with how you helped or like you created this curriculum, right? Where like you're teaching this course. So you have that, but I think, is that like, can you talk more about that? And also is the course that you made for your school the only one of those that does that?
At the time, we were one of two total that I knew of. That was 3 years ago. I would hope that more popped up now. There's not a whole lot of information out there, right? So you're kind of relying on your local expertise. Fortunately, I'm going to brag about it. We're in the Texas Medical Center, literally the world's largest medical center. You have a lot of volume, and people kind of pick up this information as they go along. So I have an excellent mentor, and Dr. McKay. She's a pediatrician at UT, and she happens to have like presented to the National Academy of the American Academy of Pediatrics at a national meeting about gun violence. She's an expert. She exists.
Oh, cool.
She is there at UT. We have these trauma surgeons. There's this one trauma surgeon who came and talked to us. I mean, he's literally an amateur gunsmith, and he also is a trauma surgeon. So he's like, he as a hobbyist, he likes guns, and then he treats it in a clinical setting. And so he talks to us about like the ballistics, like this is what happens when a bullet hits a body. Like this is the injury pattern that you're going to see, and it's a really eye-opening experience because again, like it comes down to it, like I'm going to be a physician in a year and a half, and God willing, right? And that's something that whether I'm going into general pediatrics or if I end up going into surgery and have a completed heart, I'm going to see this. I should know what this looks like before I'm in the clinical setting, which is what the whole point of preclinicals are, right? And so that was the whole point of the course. It was, we had one lecture too talking about how to approach advocacy. So I think a lot of, you took a class on it, like a lot of people don't have a strong foundation in what advocacy looks like.
Yeah.
And especially like when you're talking about something that can be so politically volatile. I mean, if you say something incorrectly, then you can really rile emotions. And so especially coming from, talking about it from like a public health, a physician saying we care about evidence-based interventions. That's what our professions are rooted in, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you can keep that in mind as you're approaching whatever topic you're approaching with advocacy, you're going to get a lot further than just going with your gut. So I think that's what gets people in a lot of trouble, especially when they talk about guns, is that there's just this, it's so emotional. You can get so emotional talking about it. And I think that if you just come and say, hey, like, this is what I care about. I care about my patients. I care about making sure that they don't get hurt. And I care about learning more about this issue so we can keep having a dialogue about what's the best way to keep our society safe, and just follow the data. Follow that rather than, the flavor of the month regarding the solutions to gun violence. Mm-hmm. I'm much more comfortable with that approach. Again, I don't want to discourage people from pushing for other interventions. I just think that if we have these approaches to address gun violence, they need to be paired with a commitment to study the impact of those. Because if they don't work, then in 5 years we should repeal it, try something else. Yeah. Or if they do work, we need to ramp it up and continue down that road. We just don't know. And I think an incremental approach, going slowly and seeing and gathering more evidence, is much better than just sweeping and saying, well, obviously we can't have guns. This does not work in our society. That's not a sustainable nor effective dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there needs to be money in order to do people have to be willing to fund, those follow-ups.
And call your congressman, call your state senator, call your state rep. I mean, those are the people who are in a position to help get funding for gun violence research. Because the reality is that one of the most frustrating things, I told you earlier that this is one of the most leading causes of mortality in children. If you go to the NIH page or the CDC Safe Kids page, you won't find it. Oh. It's not acknowledged on those pages as a major problem for public health. And until we start having a conversation about that, until we acknowledge, hey, gun violence is a public health threat to Americans, until we get to that playing field, then we're going to keep having these completely unproductive conversations about the way forward.
It's interesting that it's not there or listed there because, like, in my mind, it's definitely public health. Everyone I feel like I talk to, it's public health, and of course, it's not listed as.
Yeah. So let's see,
seems counterintuitive.
All right. So child injury prevention topics: you have burn prevention, drowning prevention, fall prevention, playground safety, poisoning prevention, road traffic safety, and sports safety. Under the additional topics, you also see bicycle safety, child passenger safety, helmet safety, pedestrian safety, and team driving safety.
That's the CDC?
That's on the CDC Safe Child page. Oh. And looking at child injury prevention tips, but you will not see anything about firearms. And but they should have like a general gun violence page. Sure,
right?
Yes. Yeah. They have, under the mass data area that they have, you'll find information about where like suicide and homicide rank.
Okay.
But if you go to areas where you're looking at, like, protect the ones you love, child injuries are preventable. This page is dedicated towards preventing child injury. And one of the leading causes of child injury is not listed on that. Until we can have an honest conversation about this is a problem, acknowledging that this is a problem, then I don't see how we can continue a conversation.
Yeah. Can you just, like, hack it and just type it in there?
Yeah.
Just put it in yourself.
So, yeah, it's politicizing public health. Yeah. If we had it's like looking at like how we approach motor vehicle accidents. We dedicated resources towards preventing motor vehicle accidents, and we followed that information. So we found out that hey, maybe we shouldn't put these trees on these intersections because then people can't see cars coming the other way. Like I would never have thought of that. I would never have put those two together. And I believe that if we let public health professionals study this, then you're going to find interventions that we didn't think of that can make our society safer. We just have to give them the chance to study it and come up with the solutions that, maybe aren't obvious right now.
Yeah. So I think this is a good time to ask you, so as a medical student, you're doing a lot of advocacy work. You're writing a lot of stuff. You're doing the classes and everything. So to anyone else in wherever they are in life, if they want to know, okay, how can I get involved in my own community with this advocacy work? Where would you advise them to start?
What do you bring to the table? As far as like for how it's the class is what started it for me. I worked with a colleague of mine, and she and I worked we were like, okay, well, we know we're in med school right now. and we're in class all the time. What can we do to impact this issue? And we settled on a class, an educational, saying, hey, we need to have a baseline understanding of this issue to move forward. And so, and that started locally in a very small, internal, and it has since last year I presented to the medical students at a national meeting for the American Medical Association. So it expands based off of what is successful locally. I think regarding specifics, that probably depends on the issue that you're most passionate about.
Right.
I think it kind of finds you. I don't think I intended to go to med school and start addressing gun violence. That was not something that I wrote in my personal statement. It was not something that, it just kind of happened, and you got to follow through. So, I think it's important to, what my mentors always told me is identifying the local partners. So you want to try and figure out who else is already doing it, and they can plug you into the right network. And that's what it really comes down to, is saying, hey, this is what I can bring. This is what I can bring to the table. I would like to help with this issue. And if you can find someone who's already in that area, because chances are you're not the first person to think of something,
right,
they can help get you started.
Yeah.
And then any insights or advice on anyone who wants to reach out to their congressman or any legislator? Because I remember back in the day, before I started doing that, I'd be really scared to reach out and call them.
I divert the question a little bit and talk about one of my favorite stories from this past year. And I promise I will get back to what you were asking in a second. But I was going to my grandma's 90th birthday party, Grandma Toffnity.
Wow.
We, really wanted a margarita, so we all went to El Paso and celebrated with a margarita. As I'm getting on this plane, this is after it was after the first presidential debate. And I'm looking at the plane. I'm like, that guy looks really familiar. Either that's Julian Castro or Joaquin Castro. And as I'm thinking that, I see, are you familiar with who Will Hurd is?
No.
He's a Republican congressman in San Antonio, and his district secretary is El Paso. He's unfortunately retiring, but he was also on that flight. And so it's it's Southwest Airlines, so you can pick wherever you want to sit. So of course I sit next to Julian, and I sit next to him, and I'm super excited. I'm going to talk to this guy, and then he passes out the entire flight. I'm like, I caught him at the very end. So I got up and I went to go talk to Will, Congressman Hurd, and he and I sat there for an hour. I mean, of course, he's on a metal tube with no exits, so he had to sit there and talk to me, which, good for me, bad for him. But we had a really great conversation about everything from vaccines to gun violence to, everything in between. And we talked about some very hot topics, and we had an honest conversation about, what the issues were. And my experience is a little... I want to avoid getting into the whole politics things, but I've had some experience working in a politician's office. I mean, these guys are they can be intimidating. Yeah, absolutely. And oftentimes, if you call, I was an intern in a congressional district in El Paso. And basically, a lot of times you would get pawned off to me to start. Not that you're like, okay, you need to start here, and this is what you really care about, and how can I help you? And as you would learn more about it, that would get escalated to the caseworker, and then eventually to the elected officials themselves. And I really think that's how things get done. Is you just start making a call and you say, hey, this is something I really care about. And you talk to somebody from that office. And eventually, enough people will call about that issue, and they're like, hey, we should really address this. We should really start thinking about this. And honestly, politicians are, I don't think they're larger than life. Obviously, it's a little, if you've never talked to them before, it can be very intimidating. I will say is that I haven't had a bad experience yet. I've been fortunate that, my conversations have been with individuals who are very open to people talking to them. Yeah. And then some state reps in Texas who, again, if you come in and you don't come in swinging, the conversations with some of the more local officials that I've talked to, especially about this, is that, if you're coming in swinging with these really emotional argument, it can be really powerful on something like social media. Yeah. But I think that people don't really hear it in person. Yeah. And then, of course, there's my big thing, too, is that, the idea that anything less than total success is considered a failure. I would check that at the door. Compromise is a good thing. You're not going to get everything you want, and if you can go in there and have an honest conversation Like when I talked to Congressman Hurd about safe storage, I have no idea what he did with that. I have no idea what came of that conversation, but I know that he had more information than he did when he got on that plane. And so I don't know if that's going to have any long-term impacts on how he votes or what, but I had that conversation. He now knows that information, and I'm going to keep having that conversation with people. And if they make a decision that I think is in the right direction, I'm not going to be like, well, they didn't do everything I wanted, so it's useless. You know, like, hey, like, you listened, you worked with me, you understand that this is a difficult issue. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's celebrate progress where we see it, and then keep having difficult conversations.
That's good advice. Yeah.
Although we're not all going to be fortunate to be on a Southwest flight with our local politician and get to pick to sit there. Serendipitous.
It was an 8 a.m. flight too, so I goes all before I'm like my brother's a big Congressman Hurd fan, so I was like, he's picking me up at the airport. I'm like, you should really walk into pick me up at the airport. He's like, why?
Oh man.
And so he now has a picture with him because it's
so random.
I stood right in front of Representative Deb Haaland from New Mexico. She's one of the Native American representatives elected, and I was so scared to talk to her. She was right in front of me on the train at Denver International Airport, DIA, and I was like, oh my god, I'm going to talk to her. I'm totally going to talk to her. And then we got off at the same terminal, and then I regret not talking to her because
you got to remember they work for you.
I know, that's the thing, but I was just like, oh my god, is that her? And then you go through your mind, you're like, that's crazy, that can't be her. And then I was just like, oh my god, it is her. And then by the time I worked up the courage to talk to her, she had to rush to her flight, and she boarded as soon as she got there.
And that's happened to me. There's I think my current representative is Al Green. I saw him at the grocery store, and I never talked to him. I should have grabbed a chance while I had it. Same thing with Mayor Sylvester Turner in Houston. I've seen him once or twice, and I've never grabbed him to talk to him, but hopefully one day.
Diana, do you have any other questions for Michael?
I mean, 5,000, but it's not relevant.
5,000.
I'm understand more things, but more confused because now I know more things. So naturally, I'm like, what? To a new level
I mean,
of
everyone
what?
thinks that guns. To go back to the gun stuff, everyone thinks there's obviously one right answer, right? But the more you go and have these conversations with people from across the country, you understand that I like the example of the Parkland students and the Santa Fe students. You saw the students from Parkland High School for what they've done. They've taken a tragedy and really say, we're going to use this to make things better. I like what they're doing. Because they're speaking while people are listening, and that's how you get things changed. The students from Santa Fe High School had the right to do that as well. Everybody as much right as the students from Parkland, and they chose not to do that, and that is the right choice for them. That is that, and there's they have a different approach. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no fault in that. Whether they grieve as a community or they just feel like that is not something that they want to do, that's entirely up to them. People approach this issue from very different ways, different perspectives, and that can be regional. That can be that can just be demographics. But this is a very complicated issue. There's no one right answer, and forward progress is forward progress, and that should be celebrated. But there's room for nuance and everything.
I think that's the main takeaway here. From what I hear is just really being okay with how complicated this issue is. I mean, I think if you're just consuming media outlets and their reports on gun violence, then I feel like because of the emotions behind it, it's very easy to feel a lot of different things, which is fine, right? But at the same time, it's like, okay, if you care about this issue and you want to advocate for it, then, like you said, there's a lot of different approaches. There's a lot to learn. There's still so much to learn. And it's okay to feel confused. And at the end of the day, it's like, if you care for it, then use what resources you have to try and just do something about it.
Yeah.
Right.
So, good reminder for me too.
Right. I think one last thing that we want to, I didn't touch on earlier, is to talk about mental health and gun violence. That's a very commonly used diversion to talk about. There is an appropriate conversation to have. When again, like I said, the vast majority of deaths associated with guns, gun and firearm injury, are suicides. It's incredibly appropriate to talk about mental health in the context of suicides. The evidence does not support that when it comes to homicide or accidental injury or mass shootings. That's just not. That's not an appropriate conversation to have, or an appropriate focus. On one hand, it's great that we're getting more mental health funding because obviously it's really underfunded. But I get really concerned by the reason it's in the focus, because people it's about like a mass shooting. Well, it's like, well, the mental illness, and that's not appropriate. That's not true. That's not how that works. If we want to talk about suicides, great. Let's talk about mental illness and increasing mental health, because that will make a difference, but it will not change mass shootings. It will not make an impact in homicides. I think it's more likely that somebody who's mentally ill is more likely to be on the receiving end of violence than to be on the perpetrator side.
Yeah. I'm super glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
So again, nuance. You hear people talk about mental illness. It is appropriate in the context of suicide. It is not appropriate in the context of mass shootings and homicides.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, any other last things you want to just put out there before we end this conversation?
No, I think I've said pretty much everything I want to say. Thank you guys so much for having me on. It's been a great conversation. I hope this is educational for your listeners.
Yeah.
Great. And any resources that you have, we will post them on our website. So go ahead and send them to us and we'll put it up there.
Great. Yeah, unfortunately there's really not a great consolidated, I know the Giffords Law Center is pretty great. Affirm Research is another good organization. They put out some really, really good stuff. But I would just encourage your listeners to, every time they read something, to just be a little skeptical.
Critical thinkers.
Yeah, that's the whole point, right? You guys are trained to be scientists and trained to be a healthcare professional. There's some scientific background with that. You got to be skeptical of everything you read.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, but before you go, I have a question. Have you ever thought about making your own podcast? I know you have, because some of you have reached out to ask how. Well, let us tell you how. It's been a breeze ever since we switched over to host on Anchor.
Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. Best of all, it's 100% free, we all love free stuff, and ridiculously easy to use. And now, Anchor can match you with great sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast. That means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's what we're doing right now by reading this ad.
Yes, and Anchor is great and simple to use and lets you schedule things out and publish to the 5 million platforms, which is how you can find us everywhere. And just a side note, we use Anchor to host, but we record and edit separately. But anyway, to see what the deal is, go to anchor.fm/start and join us and the wonderful other people podcasting here in this community.
The episode. Thank you so much, Michael, for talking with us. As a reminder, you can reach him on Twitter at Michael B. Bagg, and that's Bagg with 2 G's.
And the resources for this episode will be up on the website.
As a reminder, if you have any questions, you can always reach us at globalcaveat@gmail.com or on Instagram and Twitter at globalcaveat.
Thank you to all our listeners and supporters for helping this podcast run, and a special thanks to Cordell Glass for producing our music. Thanks for listening.